Welcome back to the deep dive for our fourth deep dive together. We're really excited to have you here with us, and be sure to follow us on social media to get all of the content that doesn't make it to the main show. Today, we are diving deep into Josh Kaufman's book, The Personal MBA. We're basically giving you an MBA without the debt and without the years in the classroom.
And what I think is so interesting is how, right out of the gate, Kaufman tackles the idea of traditional MBAs. And he's really skeptical about them, and he draws a lot on his personal experience and even points to some research by Pfeffer and Fong. And this research really showed no correlation between getting an MBA and having long-term career success.
Yeah, he doesn't really hold back any punches there. In fact, he even uses that scene from Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon's character, where he kind of calls out the whole system of higher education. He basically says you get the same education by just hanging out at the library.
It is a pretty pointed critique, and I think what makes it even more relevant is how the business world is changing so quickly. And Kaufman argues that a lot of MBA programs are stuck teaching outdated models, and these just don't prepare you for the dynamic environment that we're in now.
Yeah, it's like giving you a roadmap to a city that doesn't exist anymore. And Kaufman specifically points out how top business schools seem to be churning out consultants and financiers, but not people who actually know how to run the nuts and bolts of an actual business.
Exactly. It's like they've lost sight of what's really important. He even uses General Motors as an example and suggests that their focus on finance over operations might have contributed to some of their struggles.
Which is really thought-provoking, especially if you're thinking about taking on a bunch of debt to go get an MBA. So where does Kaufman go from there? If you're not going to follow the traditional path, what's the alternative?
He lays out what he sees as the essential building blocks of business, and he calls these the 12 standard economic value models. And these are really the fundamental ways that businesses create and capture value. We're talking about things like making a product, offering a service, or even something like facilitating a loan.
I remember he gave a bunch of really clear examples for each model to kind of illustrate the point. Like selling a physical product is very different from a subscription service or running an agency, but they all fit into this broader framework.
And I think that is the key takeaway for the listener. It's not to memorize all 12 models, but just to understand that every successful business, no matter how complicated it seems, is built on one or more of these fundamental models.
Okay, so we've got the foundation, but how do we take these basic business models and come up with a good idea, a killer business idea?
That's where things get really interesting. Kaufman gives us a 10-point framework for evaluating business ideas, and this is your checklist to figure out if an idea is worth pursuing. He looks at things like urgency, like is there a real need for this right now, market size, like how many potential customers are out there, even things like pricing potential and speed to market, like can you make a profit and can you get it out there quickly?
It's a good way to be realistic about your idea and not fall in love with an idea that won't work.
Yeah, and speaking of falling in love with ideas, he actually uses the Segway as a cautionary tale here. Do you remember those? They were supposed to be this revolutionary product with tons of investment. They were really cool, and they flopped.
Why? What happened?
Kaufman argues that even though it was a brilliant idea on paper, they just didn't do enough market research. They didn't understand what their customers actually wanted or needed.
So you could have the most amazing product in the world, but if there's no market for it, you're out of luck.
Exactly, and he even has this phrase, the crucifixion rule, which is a reminder to be brutally honest with yourself about your idea. Don't be so attached to it that you can't see the flaws.
So it's about finding that balance between passion and excitement and a clear-eyed assessment of whether or not this is going to work. You have to ask yourself, is it viable? So let's say you've got a solid business idea. You put it through the crucifixion rule. You've checked all the boxes in Kaufman's framework. What's next?
Well, according to Kaufman, now it's time to think about how to get people's attention. It's all about marketing, and he's got some really insightful ideas about how to do that effectively.
Right, because even if you have the best idea in the world, if nobody knows about it, it's not going to go anywhere.
Exactly, and he really emphasizes this idea of remarkability. You know, it's about making your product or your service stand out from the crowd, being so interesting or unique that people can't help but notice it. Like, remember those Five Fingers shoes?
Oh yeah, the ones that look like gloves for your feet? Definitely attention grabbing. You can't just walk past those without doing a double take.
Right, and that's the whole point. They spark curiosity, they get people talking. But it's not just about being different just for the sake of being different. It's about being remarkable in a way that actually resonates with your audience.
Yeah, and I remember Kaufman also talks about timing. You know, it's not just about getting attention. It's about getting the right attention at the right time.
Absolutely. He calls this targeting the right people at the right time. You don't want to waste your energy trying to sell ice to Eskimos, right? It's about focusing your efforts on the people who are most likely to be interested in what you have to offer at this particular moment.
So it's about understanding your target audience, knowing what they need and when they need it.
Exactly. And then there's another point he makes about using controversy in your marketing.
Okay, this sounds a little risky. What does he mean by that?
Now, before you think he's saying go out there and be offensive or deliberately try to stir up trouble, let me clarify. He's talking about using controversy constructively as a way to generate buzz and get people talking. And he actually uses his own book, The Personal MBA, as an example.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the title itself is kind of controversial, right? It's challenging this traditional view of business education, saying you don't necessarily need to go get an expensive MBA to be successful. And so it's a clever way to kind of grab people's attention and position himself as a disruptor in the space.
It's like he's using that little bit of controversy to pique people's interest and make them want to learn more.
Exactly. So, okay, you've got people's attention. Now what?
Now it's time to actually deliver on the promises you made. You've got to give people a reason to stick around.
And this is where Kaufman's focus on exceeding customer expectations comes in. He's a big believer in going above and beyond for your customers. And he tells this great story about Zappos, the online shoe retailer.
Oh yeah, the free overnight shipping. I mean, it seems counterintuitive from a cost perspective, but it's brilliant in terms of the customer experience. You order a pair of shoes and they're on your doorstep the next day. It's like magic.
Exactly. It makes a huge impression on people. They're wowed and they're telling all their friends about how amazing Zappos is. And Kaufman calls this the expectation effect. The idea is that the perceived quality of anything is directly tied to the gap between what we expect and what we actually experience.
So if you can consistently over-deliver, you're going to create a lot of happy customers who are going to be loyal to your brand.
That's the goal, but delivering a great product or service is only part of the equation. We also need to think about pricing. And Kaufman has some really insightful things to say about this too.
Yeah, because pricing can be tricky. If it's too high, you might scare people away, but if it's too low, you might not be making enough profit. So how do you find that sweet spot?
Well, Kaufman argues that it's not just about covering your costs. It's about understanding the psychology of pricing. And he talks about this thing called the pricing uncertainty principle.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. What is that?
It basically says that the more uncertain a customer is about the value of something, the more likely they are to just use the price as an indicator of its quality. Think about it if you're not sure about a product. You might just assume that the more expensive option is the better one.
It's like we equate price with quality, especially when we don't have other information to go on.
Exactly. So how do we set prices effectively when we're dealing with this pricing uncertainty principle? Well, Kaufman lays out 4 key methods.
All right, let's hear them.
So the first one is replacement cost. And this is essentially what it would cost to create or acquire the same thing somewhere else. It's a good starting point, but it doesn't always reflect the true value that you're bringing to the table.
Right, because you might be doing something unique or offering something special that can't be easily replaced. So what's next?
Then there's market value, which is basically what are similar products or services selling for in the market right now. It's a good way to kind of gauge what customers are willing to pay, but you don't want to just blindly follow the crowd.
Right, you need to differentiate yourself, show why your product is worth more than the competition.
Exactly. And that leads us to the third method, which is discounted cash flow or net present value. This is a more complex approach where you're projecting your future cash flows and then discounting them back to the present. It's a good way to assess the long-term profitability of your business, but it can be challenging to get those projections right.
It sounds like it requires some serious financial modeling skills. What's the fourth method?
The fourth method is comparative value, and this is all about positioning your offering against the competition and demonstrating why it's worth the price you're asking. It's about highlighting the unique benefits you provide, the problems you solve, the value that you create for your customers.
So it's about telling a compelling story, connecting with your customers on an emotional level, and showing them why your product is the best choice for them.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of business success, and that is understanding human behavior.
Because ultimately, business is all about people, right? It's about understanding what motivates people, how they make decisions, what they're looking for.
Absolutely. And Kaufman digs into this quite a bit in the book. He talks about things like the control heuristic that we mentioned earlier in the compensatory pricing, but it applies to so much more than that.
Yeah, that idea that people like to feel in control, in control of their environment, their choices, their outcomes.
Right. So how can we apply this understanding of human behavior to create more successful businesses? Well, Kaufman offers a number of insights and practical strategies for doing just that.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear them. So we were talking about the importance of understanding human behavior in business. So where does Kaufman go from there?
Well, one of the things that I found most fascinating is his exploration of personal productivity. I mean, you can have the best business plan in the world, but if you can't manage your time and energy effectively, it's not going to matter much.
Yeah, that's true. At the end of the day, we're the ones who have to execute on those plans. So what are some of Kaufman's key insights when it comes to productivity?
One that really stands out is this thing called the law of Parkinson, which basically states that work expands to fill the time allotted for it.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that myself. Give me a deadline weeks away and I'll take weeks to do it. But if it's due tomorrow, I'll find a way to get it done.
Exactly. Kaufman uses this really interesting analogy. He says, imagine you have a year to build a skyscraper. You'd likely take the whole year meticulously planning out every detail. But if you only had a day, you'd be forced to prioritize, make quick decisions, find creative solutions to get the job done.
So sometimes constraints can actually be good for us. They force us to focus and be more efficient.
Right, and it's not just about deadlines, it's about being intentional with our time and energy. And Kaufman suggests a number of techniques for doing this. One is called the 5 whys technique, which is all about getting to the root cause of a problem by repeatedly asking why.
So instead of just addressing the symptoms, you're digging deeper to really understand the underlying issue.
Exactly, and once you understand the root cause, you can come up with a much more effective solution. Another technique he talks about is focusing on the next action.
Okay, I've heard of that. What is that again?
It's basically identifying the most immediate, concrete step you can take to move something forward. It's that one thing you can do right now to make progress.
Got it. So it's about breaking down those big, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable actions.
Right, and it prevents you from getting stuck in that analysis paralysis mode where you're overthinking everything and not actually doing anything.
It's about getting things done, taking action, and making progress. But I also remember that Kaufman cautions against relying too heavily on automation.
Absolutely. He calls that the paradox of automation. It's so tempting to try and automate everything to make our lives easier and more efficient. But there's a danger in that we can become so reliant on technology that we lose touch with the underlying processes.
And that can lead to problems down the road, right? Like if something breaks down and you don't understand how it works, you're kind of stuck.
Exactly. It's like we lose the ability to think for ourselves, to solve problems, to be adaptable.
And that's not what Kaufman is advocating for. He wants us to be mindful, intentional business owners.
Right. Not just blindly following the latest trends or getting swept up in all the hype.
He wants us to really understand the principles, the human element, the systems thinking that drives success. And that's really what the Personal MBA is all about, isn't it? It's about empowering individuals to take control of their careers and their businesses, to learn and adapt in a world that's constantly changing.
It is, and I think one of the most powerful takeaways from the book is this idea that anyone can achieve business success with the right mindset and approach. You don't necessarily need that fancy degree or the corporate ladder climb. It's about continuous learning, experimentation, and a deep understanding of the fundamentals.
It's about being a lifelong learner and always striking to grow. And I think you had a final thought to leave our listeners with today.
I do consider dedicating some time each month to your own personal R&D. Just like any successful business invests in research and development, you should invest in yourself. Maybe it's reading a new book, taking an online course, attending an industry event. Keep refining your skills, expanding your knowledge, exploring new ideas.
I love that it's about making that commitment to yourself to keep learning and growing, because that's what keeps us moving forward. Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Josh Kaufman's The Personal MBA. We covered a lot of ground today, from challenging traditional business education to diving into the psychology of marketing, pricing, and productivity. Hopefully you've come away with some valuable insights and practical tools that you can apply to your own life and business. And remember, true learning comes from action and experimentation. So don't be afraid to get out there, put these principles to the test, and see what works for you. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, so share them with us on social media. And let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep diving deep.